The wind howled across the endless Central Asian steppe, a land without borders, where the horizon itself seemed to flee. The dawn sky was grey and wide, and in the distance, the sound of hooves broke the silence. This was not a land that birthed comfort. This was the forge of conquerors. It was the year 1336. Near the village of Kesh, in the heart of Transoxiana, a child was born beneath a tent of rough wool and smoke. They named him Timur, the Turkic word for iron. Perhaps it was destiny, a word that would define him for the rest of his life. For the steppe had no mercy for the weak, and the boy called Iron would learn that strength was the only law that mattered. Timur was born into the Barlas tribe, Turkicized descendants of Mongol horsemen who had once ridden under the great Genghis Khan. But the empire of Genghis had fractured into dust and rivalries. Small Khanates fought for dominance, each dreaming of uniting the steppe under their own banner. Timur's father, Tarakai, was a minor noble, respected but not powerful. His mother, Tekina Khatun, was known for her wisdom and unyielding faith. From the beginning, life was an education in hardship. The cold of the desert nights, the heat of the noon sun, the hunger that gnawed during long winters, all were tutors that shaped the boy. He learned to ride before he could walk properly. He learned to draw a bow before he could write his name. He learned that compassion was a luxury few could afford. The steppe was not ruled by kings, it was ruled by the wind, and those strong enough to chase it. Timur grew up listening to stories of Genghis Khan, whispered by the elders around the fire. They spoke of how one man, born in the wilderness, had forged an empire from the edge of the world to the gates of China. The stories ignited something deep within him, a hunger, a flame that would never fade. If one man could unite the tribes, why not another? At 12, Timur had already mastered the bow, the spear, and the curved saber. His movements were deliberate, efficient, almost mechanical. His peers respected him, but also feared him. There was something relentless in his gaze, as if he were already measuring the world, calculating its weaknesses. The steppes taught him one truth: to survive, one must strike first. But survival was never enough for Timur. He sought mastery. When he was a teenager, rival tribes raided the Barlas lands. The young warriors fled. Timur did not. He gathered a handful of men, ambushed the raiders at dawn, and reclaimed what was stolen. It was not victory that mattered. It was the statement it made. The boy had become a commander. From then on, the elders began to whisper his name with reverence. He rode with older warriors, learned the rhythm of cavalry charges, the psychology of battle, the silence before slaughter. He studied the art of war the way others studied religion. He believed in destiny, but not in luck. He believed in will, forged through pain. One night, beneath the stars, his father said, "The steppe is a sea, my son. Men are like waves. They rise, they fall. But the wind endures. Be the wind." Timur remembered those words for the rest of his life. Years later, when his father died, Timur stood over his grave in silence. No tears, no prayers, only a promise that his name would never be forgotten. By his late teens, Timur had begun to move among greater players. The steppe was a chessboard of shifting alliances between Turkic tribes, Mongol princes, Persian nobles, and distant sultans. He learned to speak the language of diplomacy as easily as that of war. He would smile while planning betrayal, and bow while calculating vengeance. And then came the moment that would change everything. A warlord named Husayn, ambitious and ruthless, sought to seize power in Transoxiana. Timur, young but cunning, allied himself with him, not out of loyalty, but out of strategy. Together they rose in rebellion, gathering an army of horsemen, hungry for gold and glory. The plains shook beneath the thunder of their hooves. Timur led from the front, his armor glinting like silver in the sun. His men said he never showed fear, even when arrows sliced the air around him. During one of these battles, Timur was struck by 2 arrows, one in his right arm, the other in his leg. He survived, barely, but he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. From that day, he became known as Timur the Lame. Tamerlane. It was a name meant to mock him. It became a name that would terrify empires. Timur's injury did not weaken him, it hardened him. He began to think not like a warrior, but like a conqueror. He studied maps, trade routes, and cities. He watched how leaders fell, not to armies, but to pride. He vowed never to make the same mistakes. He married Husayn's sister, solidifying their alliance. But as their power grew, so did the tension. Timur saw that Husayn's ambition was clouded by arrogance, while his own was guided by vision. When the time came, Timur made a choice, one that defined the rest of his life. He betrayed Husayn. The 2 men, once brothers in arms, faced each other in battle. Husayn was captured and executed. Timur took his army, his lands, and his dream. In the ashes of betrayal, the foundations of an empire were laid. Timur was only in his mid-30s, yet his reputation had already spread across the steppe. To his followers, he was a savior, a man of divine favor, chosen by the heavens. To his enemies, he was a shadow that moved faster than the wind. He reorganized his forces into a disciplined war machine. Every unit had a purpose, every maneuver a rhythm. He introduced strict codes of conduct, punishing cowardice with death, but rewarding loyalty with gold. He saw war not as chaos, but as art, a grand composition of motion, fear, and precision. Timur once said to his captains, "A lion alone can scatter 1,000 sheep, but 1,000 lions, united, can shake the earth." This philosophy became the heart of his empire. As his influence expanded, so too did his vision. Timur no longer dreamed of ruling a tribe, he dreamed of ruling the world. But to do so, he needed more than soldiers. He needed legitimacy. He began to present himself as the heir to both Genghis Khan and Islamic tradition, a bridge between Mongol conquest and Persian culture. He adopted the symbols of royalty, commissioned poets to praise him, and declared that his wars were guided by divine justice. Samarkand, once a quiet trading town, became his capital, the center of his growing empire and his ambition. Its streets filled with artisans, scholars, and merchants. Its walls echoed with the sound of hammers building the monuments of a new dynasty. And yet, behind the gold and glory, Timur's mind remained restless. He dreamed of conquest as a poet dreams of words, not for gain, but for meaning. In those early years, before the great campaigns began, Timur would ride alone into the desert at night. He would stop, dismount, and stare at the stars. The silence of the steppe was endless, the wind cold against his face. No one knew what he thought during those nights. Some said he spoke to God. Others said he listened to the ghosts of old conquerors. But perhaps, in that vast emptiness, he simply understood what all rulers eventually learn, that the world itself is never enough. Timur returned from those solitary rides, more determined than ever. He gathered the tribes under his banner, crushed the last remnants of opposition, and declared himself Emir of Transoxiana. The Iron Child of the Steppe had become the Iron Lord, and as dawn broke over the plains, his army, tens of thousands strong, awaited his command. Timur looked to the horizon and said quietly, "We ride east first, and then the world." The steppe answered him with thunder. The wind that once carried the cries of battle now carried something new, the beginning of empire. The year was 1370. Across the ancient lands of Transoxiana, smoke curled toward the sky, not from war, but from coronation fires. The tribes had gathered, the banners of the Barlas, the Jalair, the Karluk, and a dozen more swayed in the steppe wind. At their center stood a man cloaked in silver and red. Timur, scarred, limping, yet unbroken. On that day, he proclaimed himself Emir of Samarkand, ruler of the steppe, protector of the faith. But there was no crown on his head. He did not need one. His authority was written not in gold, but in fear. From this moment, his destiny turned outward. The world beyond the horizon would become his battlefield. Timur's first act was not conquest, it was control. He understood that chaos could not build empires. He imposed a strict hierarchy. Commanders chosen by merit, soldiers trained with relentless discipline, scouts rewarded for intelligence rather than bravery. He turned tribal war bands into a machine of precision. Each soldier carried not just a sword, but purpose. Every formation, every drumbeat was timed to the rhythm of his will. Timur personally inspected the camps at dawn, ensuring horses were fed, weapons sharpened, tents aligned to the east. When a warrior failed to keep formation, Timur did not shout. He merely looked. That was enough. It was said that his silence was deadlier than his sword. In Samarkand, he built more than walls. He built a legend. He summoned artisans from Persia, engineers from Damascus, scholars from the far corners of the Islamic world. The city became a living engine of brilliance and fear. When his army marched, the people of Samarkand lined the streets to watch. Thousands of horsemen, disciplined as clockwork, faces hidden behind steel masks. Each carried a banner embroidered with one word: justice. But Timur's justice was not mercy. He believed peace could only be achieved when enemies were too broken to resist it. His first campaigns were tests of strength and of message. He struck north toward Khwarezm, where defiant Khans refused to pay tribute. His forces swept through like a sandstorm, fast and silent. Cities that resisted were burned. Those that surrendered were rebuilt, their leaders reinstated under his watchful eye. He did not conquer merely for territory. He conquered to educate. Rebellion was a disease. Fear was the cure. His soldiers were taught to act with surgical precision. When an enemy town surrendered, Timur would order the construction of a tower, not of stone, but of skulls. Each skull was placed meticulously, the monument left standing in the city square. It was both punishment and warning. And yet, he never saw himself as cruel. To him, cruelty was the language of order. As his power spread across Central Asia, Timur turned his eyes westward. Persia lay in turmoil, fractured, leaderless, rich, a perfect target. His army crossed the Oxus River like a tide of iron. Cities fell in days, fortresses in hours. His generals learned his rhythm: speed, deception, annihilation. He preferred to attack at dawn, when men were half awake and the world was silent. When asked how he decided where to strike, Timur once replied, "Wherever pride blinds wisdom, I will go." And so he went: Shiraz, Isfahan, Herat. Each city different, yet each story the same: surrender, tribute, or ruin. In Isfahan, resistance was fierce. Timur offered peace. The city refused. When the gates finally opened, 70,000 bodies lined the streets. He ordered no celebration. Instead, he sat in silence, looking over the ruins. His chroniclers later wrote, "The emir wept, for even wrath is heavy." But none could say whether those tears were for the dead or for the folly of those who defied him. Every victory refined his art of war. Timur was not a brute. He was an engineer of destruction. He studied the tactics of Alexander, Genghis Khan, and the ancient Persians, blending them into something new. Where Genghis relied on overwhelming movement, Timur preferred precision. He would feign retreat, lure the enemy into open plains, and crush them between cavalry wings that struck like jaws. In one campaign against the Golden Horde, he faced armies twice his size. He split his force into 3 divisions, hid one in a dry riverbed, and provoked the horde into pursuit. When their horses thundered across the plain, Timur's hidden troops emerged like ghosts, cutting off escape routes. Within hours, tens of thousands were dead, and the steppes that had once defied him bowed to his flag. After the battle, he told his men, "The sword is only sharp when guided by the mind. Strength without thought is a beast. Thought without strength is a corpse." It became the creed of his empire. As he conquered, Timur cultivated an image of divine inevitability. He claimed dreams guided his actions, that prophets appeared to him in the night, urging him toward destiny. The faithful believed him. The fearful did not dare doubt. His banners bore verses from the Quran. His coins carried titles such as Conqueror of the World and Shadow of God. But behind the divine facade was a strategist who trusted no one. He once said to a scribe, "Trust is a bridge built of sand. I prefer iron." His empire stretched now from the mountains of Persia to the gates of India. But Timur was never satisfied. He viewed every horizon as a challenge, every victory as a prelude to something greater. It was during this time that the Timurid Code was born, a system of law, discipline, and war ethics that ruled both his armies and his cities. Stealing from the weak was death. Lying to the emir was death. Failing him in battle, worse than death. And yet, the same man who built towers of skulls also built mosques of unmatched beauty. He would order captured artisans to create wonders, blue domes, mirrored halls, gardens where fountains sang. To Timur, art and war were not opposites. They were reflections of the same force, the will to impose order on chaos. But as power grew, so did paranoia. Assassins stalked his camps, rivals whispered his downfall. Timur responded as he always did, with absolute precision. He created a network of spies across his empire. Couriers rode day and night, carrying reports to Samarkand. Every rumor, every movement, every whisper, known to him within days. His word became law. His silence became judgment. When he suspected betrayal, he did not rage. He simply ordered, "Bring him!" And that was enough. Timur's war machine had become unstoppable. From the frozen lands of the north to the deserts of the south, his banners were feared. Yet those closest to him knew that his true enemy wasn't a rival. It was time. He had seen great empires rise and crumble. He had studied history, not as a scholar, but as a warning. He knew that every empire had a weak point, the moment when expansion turns into overreach. So he sought to move faster than history itself. He told his advisors, "If the world is aflame, I will be the wind that feeds it." By his late 50s, Timur had achieved what few dared dream, an empire that bridged east and west, bound not by bloodlines, but by fear, faith, and order. But there remained one empire that haunted him, the Ottoman Turks, rising under Bayezid the Thunderbolt. Timur saw in Bayezid a reflection of himself, bold, ambitious, untamed. Two storms gathering on opposite horizons. Their clash would define an age. But that story, the fire and the fury that followed, belongs to another chapter. For now, Timur stood at the height of his power. He walked through the palaces of Samarkand, past marble walls carved with verses of victory. His limp was heavier, but his gaze as sharp as ever. He looked at the horizon, where the desert met the stars, and whispered, "When iron stops moving, it rusts." The night wind carried his words away, for the world had not yet seen the full measure of his storm. The empire of Timur now stretched like a scar across the heart of the world. From the steppes of Central Asia to the deserts of Persia, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the gates of Baghdad, his name was whispered in awe and terror. He was the Iron Lord. The world bowed not to his crown, but to his will. And yet, the greater the empire grew, the darker its shadow became. Timur believed conquest was a divine duty, a sacred order to bring discipline to chaos. But in his wake lay cities turned to dust, rivers running red, and towers made not of stone, but of bone. When his chroniclers wrote of his triumphs, they spoke of order restored, faith defended, heresy punished. Yet the people who lived beneath his rule remembered only the silence that followed, the kind of silence that comes after screams. Still, none could deny his genius. Timur did not destroy for pleasure. He destroyed to rebuild in his image. In Baghdad, the once proud city of scholars and poets, the caliph's banners dared to fly without his approval. Timur offered peace. Baghdad refused. He surrounded the city, cutting every road, every source of water. For 40 days the city resisted. On the 41st, it fell. The streets of Baghdad became rivers of ash. Over 90,000 were slain. The survivors were marked, branded with the symbol of Timur's rule, a crescent of iron. When his generals praised the victory, Timur replied coldly, "Victory is not the taking of land. Victory is when no one dares to dream of resistance." But even in conquest, he was not without contradictions. He ordered mosques rebuilt, libraries reopened, scholars protected, as long as they swore loyalty. He summoned astronomers to chart the heavens, physicians to heal his soldiers, poets to immortalize his deeds. To many, he was both destroyer and patron, a man of faith and fire. His obsession with Samarkand grew stronger than ever. He envisioned it as the jewel of the world, the axis of civilization. Every campaign he waged had two prizes: gold for war and artisans for Samarkand. After each victory, he sent thousands of craftsmen home under guard: sculptors from Delhi, architects from Shiraz, calligraphers from Baghdad, tile makers from Isfahan. He told them, "Build me a city that even heaven will envy." And they did. Blue domes rose against the desert sky. Minarets spiraled toward the sun. Marble courtyards reflected the stars. Samarkand became a mirage of beauty, built from the ashes of the world. Yet those who built it never saw home again. By 1398, Timur's eyes turned east toward India. The Delhi Sultanate had grown rich, arrogant, and unfaithful in his eyes. He declared that their corruption offended God, and that he would cleanse the land. His army crossed the Hindu Kush in winter, losing men to cold and mountain winds. Those who survived became ghosts of steel and frost. They reached the plains of India, a world of heat and color, alien and mesmerizing. At the Battle of Delhi, the Sultan's forces outnumbered Timur's. But Timur had studied them well. He noticed the elephants, armored beasts carrying towers of archers. He saw the fear they inspired. So he turned that fear upon its masters. He ordered his engineers to tie burning hay and oil-soaked wood to camels. As the elephants charged, the camels were set aflame and released. In terror, the elephants turned back, trampling their own ranks. The Delhi army collapsed in confusion. Timur's cavalry struck like lightning. By nightfall, the capital of India was his. The sack of Delhi was merciless. Palaces burned. The streets were piled with the dead. Chroniclers wrote that the Ganges turned red for 3 days. But amid the carnage, Timur entered the grand mosque and prayed. He thanked God for his victory and declared that India had been purified. Then, as suddenly as he came, he left. He did not stay to rule. He did not seek a throne. He took only wealth, captives, and glory. To Timur, empires were not places. They were ideas carried by armies. Yet beneath the grandeur, the Iron Lord began to feel the weight of age. His limp grew heavier, his nights grew longer, but his mind sharper than ever. He spent hours in his observatory, speaking with astronomers about fate and the stars. He would ask, "If the heavens are written, can a man rewrite them with his sword?" None dared answer. He believed that destiny was not found, it was forged. The next storm came from the west. The rising empire of the Ottomans, led by Bayezid I, known as the Thunderbolt, had begun to dominate Anatolia. Timur viewed him with both admiration and disdain. Bayezid was proud, reckless, and swift, a man cut from the same steel. Two predators, too great for one world. Their letters to each other became duels of words. Bayezid called Timur a crippled old man. Timur replied, "If you had been in my cradle, you would still have been feeding on milk. I, even in my old age, feed on kings." War was inevitable. In 1402, their armies met near Ankara. The sun burned hot over the Anatolian plains. Timur commanded over 140,000 men, disciplined, hardened, fanatically loyal. Bayezid had fewer, but his Janissaries were fierce, and his elephants from India stood like moving fortresses. Timur studied every weakness: the terrain, the water sources, the impatience of Bayezid himself. He cut the Ottomans off from their wells, poisoned their rivers, and surrounded them in silence. The battle began with thunder, drums, arrows, the clash of metal. But by noon, chaos ruled. Bayezid's allies betrayed him, his elephants panicked, and Timur's encirclement closed like a steel trap. When the dust settled, the thunderbolt had fallen. Bayezid was captured, a king in chains. Timur's victory shook the world. No one had ever defeated the Ottomans before. He entered Ankara not as a conqueror, but as a storm that had already passed. Legend says that he kept Bayezid alive, seated in a gilded cage, not out of cruelty but curiosity. He reportedly said, "Had you been my friend, we could have divided the world. But since you chose to be my rival, I will teach you humility." After Ankara, Timur's name became myth. Europe trembled. Kings sent envoys with gifts, not armies. Even the mighty Ming dynasty of China sent word of caution and respect. But power breeds hunger. Timur's body was failing, yet his spirit refused to rest. He began to plan one last campaign against China itself. A war to end all wars, a final empire carved from the bones of the world. In the winter of 1404, Timur gathered his forces once again. The old lion mounted his horse for the last time. He was 70 years old, frail in flesh but iron in will. His soldiers wept as he rode past, wrapped in furs, face hardened by decades of wind and blood. He looked east, toward the rising sun, and whispered, "One more dawn." They marched across the frozen steppes. But fate, that old enemy, struck at last. In February 1405, near the town of Otrar, Timur fell ill. Fever consumed him. He refused to stop. For days he muttered in delirium, about horses, about stars, about destiny unfinished. Then, on the 24th day of the journey, the Iron Lord grew silent. His men laid him on the snow, the wind howling around them. He looked at the horizon one last time and smiled. And so, the world lost its conqueror. They carried his body back to Samarkand. There, beneath the great dome of the Gur-e-Amir, they buried him, surrounded by turquoise tiles and silence. On his tomb was carved an inscription said to curse anyone who disturbed his rest. When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble. Centuries later, when his tomb was opened, the world did tremble. The very next day, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. Perhaps coincidence, or perhaps, as the people whispered, the iron had risen once more. The Iron Lord was gone. The man who had shaken the world with fire and steel now lay silent beneath the blue dome of Gur-e-Amir. And yet, even in death, Timur refused to rest. The winds of Samarkand carried whispers that his soul had not departed, that the earth itself held its breath. For 40 years he had ruled through terror and genius, and when such a force disappears, the world trembles not in mourning, but in uncertainty. What happens to an empire built on the will of one man when that will turn to dust? At first, the empire seemed intact. Timur's generals, nobles and sons gathered in Samarkand to honor his passing. The great emirate he forged stretched from the Black Sea to the Indus, but within that vastness were seeds of division, ambition, jealousy, and silence where his command once thundered. His son Shah Rukh emerged as heir, not through conquest, but through patience. He understood what his father never had, that to rule an empire, one must sometimes choose restraint over rage. Under Shah Rukh, the Timurid realm began to transform. The swords were sheathed, the cities rebuilt, and Samarkand's glory flourished once more, this time under the rule of peace. But the shadow of Timur was impossible to escape. His soldiers still carried his words like scripture. Mercy is the armor of the weak. His name remained a weapon. Even kings beyond his borders used it to frighten their enemies. Do not awaken the wrath of the Timurids, lest the iron return. In the decades after his death, his legend grew larger than his empire. The chronicles told of a man chosen by God, guided by dreams, who could not be killed by ordinary means. Merchants told stories of how his armies moved faster than the wind. Children whispered that his horses had no shadows. Some swore that in the deserts of Central Asia, on still nights, the echo of drums could still be heard, the march of Timur's ghostly legions. And yet, while myths spread, a quieter legacy unfolded, one that would shape the future of civilization more than his conquests ever could. The Timurid Renaissance. Under Shah Rukh and his brilliant wife, Gauhar Shad, the empire turned from war to wisdom. Art, science, architecture, and poetry flourished in the very lands Timur had once set aflame. In Herat, their capital, painters developed new styles of illumination. Calligraphers transformed the Arabic script into flowing art. Astronomers studied the skies using instruments forged from the empire's old war metals. The iron of destruction became the iron of discovery. One man in particular would carry Timur's vision beyond the battlefield. Ulugh Beg, his grandson. Ulugh Beg was no conqueror. He was a scholar, a stargazer, a mind of precision. He built an observatory in Samarkand, so vast and advanced that for 2 centuries it remained unmatched anywhere in the world. There, he charted the positions of over 1,000 stars with astonishing accuracy, centuries before telescopes existed. He once said, "My grandfather conquered the earth. I will conquer the sky." In a way, he did. The Zigi Sultani, his star catalogue, became one of the great scientific works of the medieval world. It would later guide astronomers in the Ottoman Empire and Europe. Through Ulugh Beg, Timur's empire of fear became an empire of knowledge. But power, even enlightened, is fragile. As generations passed, the unity Timur had forged began to fade. Princes turned against each other. Cities that had once thrived under his discipline fell into disarray. The empire splintered, not with thunder, but with whispers. Yet, out of that collapse, something remarkable happened. A distant descendant of Timur, Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad Babur, carried the family's ambition eastward. In 1526, Babur crossed the Khyber Pass with a small army and immense purpose. He defeated the sultans of Delhi and founded a new dynasty, the Mughal Empire. From Timur's bloodline would come emperors like Akbar the Great, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, whose love built the Taj Mahal. From the ashes of Samarkand, a new civilization arose, one that ruled the Indian subcontinent for centuries. Thus, Timur's empire didn't die. It migrated, changing form, but never spirit. And so the question lingers. Was Timur a barbarian or a visionary? A tyrant or a builder? Perhaps both. He saw the world as a broken sword and believed himself its blacksmith. In his eyes, peace without strength was illusion, beauty without discipline, corruption. He was the paradox of the human condition. Destruction used to create order. His palaces crumbled, his generals vanished, but his idea, that will alone can bend history, endured. In the centuries that followed, explorers, emperors, and revolutionaries studied his life. Napoleon admired his audacity. Stalin envied his fear. Historians debated whether he was the last of the steppe conquerors or the first modern strategist. When archaeologists opened his tomb in 1941, they found his skeleton still broad-shouldered, still defiant, still resting beneath the inscription, "Whoever disturbs my rest will unleash an invader greater than I." The next day, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Coincidence, perhaps, but it only deepened his myth. Today, in modern Uzbekistan, Timur is not remembered as a monster, but as a nation's founder. Statues of him rise in Tashkent and Samarkand, not in armor of blood, but in robes of state, holding a book instead of a sword. His face adorns currency. His words are carved into the hearts of his people. Strength is in justice. For the first time in 6 centuries, the Iron Lord stands not as a conqueror, but as a symbol of identity. The idea that greatness is not given, but forged. But the truest legacy of Timur may not lie in stone or story. It lies in the uneasy truth. His life revealed that ambition and destruction are siblings, born from the same fire that drives civilization forward. He built an empire of fear, yet out of that fear came knowledge, art, and beauty. He tore the world apart, and in the gaps he left, new worlds grew. Like iron, humanity is shaped by the hammer and the flame. And perhaps that was Timur's greatest lesson, that to build anything eternal, one must first endure the heat. In the stillness of the Samarkand night, the stars that Ulugh Beg once mapped still burn above his grandfather's tomb. Their light crosses centuries, silent and constant, just as the memory of the man beneath them refuses to fade. And if you stand there long enough, you can almost hear it. The whisper of hooves, the echo of banners snapping in the wind. For somewhere, in history's endless dusk, the iron still rides.